Well, it's a good morning here in the shop today. I'll show you where we're at. I still have to sand this part of the cab. So if you haven't seen the older videos, we basically repainted the box, the rear bumper, a lower door and front fender. So basically, the color wasn't great. So we decided we're going to go ahead and paint the whole cab of the truck, because the truck was pretty nice, and it had some spots. There was some dots in the hood and blisters coming up and stuff like that. So while the truck was good, we figured let's go ahead. The customer kind of said basically, instead of trying to blend the box in, just paint the whole cab. This is what we ended up with. There's new steel in that whole fender there, like the wheel arch was all repaired, so it looks pretty stunning. We also did this door because it was bubbling up from under that rubber there, so that's been wet sanded already. So the idea there is when we do the cab, we can do it all as one. With the matrix system, it'll be so close that from the box to the cab here, you're not going to see that there's a difference. As long as it's sprayed at the same pressures that the first one was painted at, it should be identical. So this fender we had done, so I'm going to wet sand that. And what I'll probably do when we paint the cab, this fender and that back door, the first 2 coats of color, we're probably going to skip the door and the fender and make sure we get 2 coats on the rest of the cab. And then on the 3rd coat, which I actually run at a little bit higher pressure. And again, that depends on your paint gun, the paint you're using and whatnot, your setup. There's a lot of things that matter. But basically that door will kind of go down the edge of the cab, the bottom of the door, which wasn't painted. And we'll just kind of blend it up into that one. But then on the last coat, we'll do one nice wet coat on the whole truck, because that's already had a couple coats on it. So it'll all blend out and look pretty good. You can see here how the hood looked. Well, it's hard to tell, but the hood was basically darker than the fender. And it was to begin with, but basically we made it worse. So what happened with this truck is it was originally paint code PB5 Electric Blue, which is what's on the sticker on the doors. And someone had special ordered one in a darker color. Now it was supposed to come in deep water blue, and which is a GXB. I can't remember the code, but anyway, it's a close color but darker to what's on the box, which is electric blue. But for some reason, when the truck actually showed up, we took some paint swatches and what have you, and we believe it's Patriot Blue, which would be PB7. So why the sticker didn't match the color on the truck, and all the paperwork, all the sales paperwork from when the truck was new, someone stuck a PB5 sticker in there for whatever reason, and it is what it is. So sometimes weird things happen. The bumper obviously had some wear spots and chips and whatnot, so we cleaned all those up. I still got to tape off the lights, but that's all been sanded. And the primer that you're seeing is actually your CRE 321, which is an epoxy primer that's sandable, so this will stick like crazy. So we'll give those gray spots a scuff. Same up here and everywhere else. The body work, we found a little dot here. We're going to have to fix that. We fixed most of those stone chips. There's a couple that sanded to where you might see them through the paint, so we're going to go over a couple of those. But you can see the box. Again, it's quite stunning. The color is really nice. Turned out well. So that's what we're doing today. Now, talking about the grills, and I had issues with Toyota and some Ford products, and Dodge may or may not be a little different. However, when you're prepping these grills, you don't want to over sand these. You got to be a little bit careful and dainty. I did use a couple sheets of 400. I used ones that we had used off the truck that were still, half decent, and got all the flat surfaces, and then I easily went around the corners and edges with a Scotch-Brite. What happens with the grills sometimes is if you take a little bit off and you don't quite notice it, if the plastic shows through, any of the primers or anything with reducer in it, as soon as it touches where the plastic is showing, it tends to seep in underneath and lift the finish. It's almost like they just paint right over the plastic using an adhesion promoter, so there's no if there's any at all, I can't see there being much primer or anything. I think they just use like an adhesion promoter, shoot the paint on and cook it on. It's almost like a skin on there. So think of it as like a vinyl wrap. So if anything chemical that's a little bit stronger can seep in there, it does. And then next thing you know, you're peeling it way back, and either you epoxy prime the whole thing and then body work it. You can also rough it up and do like, say, filler in all the spots where it lifted. And then when you sand it, you got to make sure you don't go through the filler. So it's a little bit of a trick. So if you have a little spot, keep that in mind. Make sure there's a bit of primer, filler, something. And again, when I say primer, be careful. For something small, a lot of us will use a product something like this. That's your Dominion Sure Seal one step. So right before paint, if you have anything weird, you can shoot a bit of that on, and within 10 minutes you can paint over it. The downside to using something like that on this, unlike just a cheesy lacquer primer, that stuff there has a pretty strong solvent in it. So it will go between the plastic and the paint and kind of lift it. So make sure, like I say, you're pretty easy on these parts. I don't know, but I've never noticed anyone talking about that before. So I just thought I'd mention that. That's kind of important. The plastic bumpers, sort of similar, but I think they're prepared a little differently, and I've never had that same issue. That being said, though, you'll get either fish eyes or, you know, weirdness happening in the paint if you don't prime the spots where, and here, it was hard to tell if it broke through or not. Now, right in this corner here, it was actually, there was some damage. We had to clean that up and, you know, fill it and prime it and then epoxy prime it. So that's all sealed in really well. But same with the front of the hood. These Dodgers are known to go, basically they start peeling around all these edges. You can see here where we ground it out. But, you know, we used an etching primer as we were working on it. And then at the end, we basically just shot a light coat of epoxy primer on it to seal it all in. So that worked out pretty good. And in this case, he's got these mud flaps. And on the back, we're literally not doing nothing. That's where all the stones and stuff hit. But what was happening with these, they were painted about 10 years ago. So you had a lot of little spider web cracking, but the finish that was on them was very sound, and you could hardly sand it, let alone scrape it off. So whoever did these did a great job. So basically I did, 2, maybe 3 coats of epoxy primer. So what happens, the texture that looks rough isn't the primer, that's actually the texture of the plastic. So I don't think these particular mud flaps were originally meant to be painted, but basically there was spider web cracks throughout. So this stuff is pretty cool. It's like a glue, it's flexible. They'll be half decent because they got to be painted to match the truck, or they would have been that other blue that we don't want on there anymore. So, and again, these do wear and whatnot, but I gotta say what was there before held up well. So there's no reason the way we did this with the epoxy primer that these won't hold up well. And they'll cover really well because, you know, gray primer is pretty good with that. So the tailgate is brand new. This is an aftermarket, right out of the box tailgate. I did set it on the truck to see how it fit, and it fits fairly well. We went ahead, and these come like, I guess it's like a black. Some of them are EDP coated. I don't know if they all are, but whatever it is, it's fairly thin, and you sand through. Now this tailgate will fit from, I think, what, 02 or 03, right up to 08. But 7 and 8, they have a spoiler on the back, so we had to basically set the spoiler on, drill these 4 holes. Now the factory tailgate actually had square holes here, and there's like a plug and then another plug that holds the spoiler on. So there's basically like a 2-sided tape that holds it to the back, and then here you put these 4 plugs in. I went with a round hole. We're just going to pop round plugs in there. And what I did do on the back side of the holes, I don't know if we can see those. If you look up in there, you'll see primer. So basically, we tried to wedge the gun in there to shoot primer in there. And, you know, that should negate any rust. I mean, it is all whatever that black stuff is they put in there. But the main thing that I wanted to get wasn't just those holes. This is what I should be showing you, actually. So when you come down, give me a sec here. The one-armed bandit thing sucks. So basically where that edge is folded over all the way around both sides and, you know, across the bottom, water and stuff gets in there. So we figured it would be a good idea. I mean, you got to paint the whole thing anyway, so why not epoxy prime everything? We did 3 coats, so a lot of that stuff will be sealed. Now you could seam seal it and whatever too, but the main thing is to get the paint to stick, which we should have no problem with. I am going to have to sand this now. Now, when you would use this primer, I think it says you have 2 days or 3 days where you don't have to sand it and the paint will stick, because I guess it's still curing. So the idea is the reducer in your base coat will slightly melt the surface and they'll bond together, and then you clear coat it and that's all one. However, you look close here, and again, the orange peel you're seeing, the camera's picking it up pretty good right now, but it's not real high. But that being said, I mean, you know, everything that's not right underneath, it'll basically print through your base coat. Your base coat flattens out pretty thin and it basically shows everything, so you can't expect clear coat to hide that. If this was a straight urethane single stage, a real minor scuff would take that out. But I'm gonna be a little careful when I sand this. But this stuff, I gotta be honest, it sands out really, really nice. I did a video before where I think I was doing the hood scoop for the Rumblebee, a Ram Rumblebee, and basically we were talking about the primer, and I just kind of went over and sanded some of that live just to show you how easy it was. And the nice thing with it, it actually kind of goes lighter, or is it darker when you sand it? But as you take this the hard skin, I'd say, off as you're sanding, you can really see where you sand it and where you didn't. It's kind of like acts like its own guide coat, so it's pretty user friendly. I'm really, really happy with this stuff. And I'd probably give a shout out to if you want to learn how to do things at a real high level and really meticulous, go check out Sylvester Customs. Now, I don't know if I can give him a shout out or not, but I'm gonna. He uses a VP. I can't remember the name of the stuff, but the primer is VP, you know, and whatever the number is. And then he said, if you can't get that, get this. These two products basically work the same. And in my area, I can get this. And this is basically, let me show you what the can is. I found this stuff has been a bit of a game changer for me. I can do things a lot quicker. Hang on, let's come around this side. There's the satellite. There we are, commercial performance. It is by PPG. That's what it says on the bottom. I don't know if it always was, but apparently they bought this out. Probably so they could make that VP, whatever it is. But here you are. So your CRE 321. And then this is the stuff you get here that you mix in. You get 2 quarts of that with a kit. So basically, this is really expensive. There's stuff way more expensive. So it's probably middle of the road price-wise, but you got the primer and you got that stuff. So you've got 1.5 gallons right there. And you also add, so it's basically a 2-to-1 to half. And then your half, like here I got the LR reducer. But you can, you know, it just says reducer. So I don't know how particular you have to be with the reducer, but I was told by the guy that, you know, I get all my paint products from. He says this is what he uses. And he says if you have the PPG Omni, that works fine. Basically, some guys say that they're not all the same, and then other guys say that reducer is reducer is reducer. I don't buy cheap, weird, off-brand stuff. I basically use the same reducer that I'm going to paint with when I'm using the primer, because, I mean, you know, it's going over top of it anyway. So, but it works really well. This is good stuff. You know, 2 thumbs up for that. And again, thanks to Sylvester Customs for bringing that up. He did a whole video on primers and he talked about it, and it's worth watching. Even for little things sometimes, instead of hitting them here and there, I'll try to, you know, leave them and then do more, and then basically just hit them with a bit of this primer. So it is thick, but I'm using a 1.8 tip. And I find it plenty thick with a 1.8 tip. I know people talk about different sizes. This isn't a super expensive gun. I think it was a couple, maybe $200-300. Optimum 350. It's got a 1.8 tip, and I believe it has a 2 or maybe a 2.1 tip. So it's got all the parts if you want to go heavier. A lot of the times, though, I'll turn the fluid down. so I can kind of brush it on. Like you see these little chips and whatnot, right? So you can kind of brush it on, like airbrush it is what I mean. You know, you can spray it a little bit lighter, and you know, because you're just using it as a sealer. And I find it will flatten out. Here's one that I did here. And you can hardly tell that, like, there's no, you know, once I scuff that, that'll be perfect. It doesn't seem to put a bunch of globbiness. You know, here there was a little mark, and I mean, we're not going to get too fussy with fixing every little mark, but you want everything to stick. So we put a little bit of epoxy there. Right here, something was off and it wore through the plastic, so we did that. But basically any of those spots. And again, like, it's not all globby. You do feel a bit of overspray, so that has to be scuffed again. But it's really nice stuff. So that's what we're working on today. I imagine I'll probably have the grill and all those parts ready to shoot this afternoon. So we'll do that. And then we'll pull them out tomorrow. The roof is ready. We had to do a major repair up there. And because of how the doors sit, and I don't want to pull all the doors off and everything, so what we're going to do is have the doors just cracked open, and I'm going to paint the roof tomorrow. And once that's dry and cured, yeah, we'll probably, if not the next day, maybe the day after, we can plastic over the roof, and then we're basically going to plastic off the box, the wheels, windshield, paint the whole cab, essentially, minus the roof. So some of these modern vehicles aren't nice like the old vehicles, because you do have to, you know, like in this case, we're not going to worry if the blue here on this edge up underneath the hood is a little different. We're just going to kind of overspray it in past and that sort of thing. So, and as far as the jams go, we're going to do the J tape. It's like a foam tape. So I'll put that on the edge of the door, so when you shut the door, you'll see the foam here. And what happens is there's no overspray. You just have where it kind of bleeds away into the old paint. And a good example of that would be if I come down here. So the top of the door is old paint and the bottom is the new paint, because we had repaired down here. There was a big dent where it had been hit in that corner. But you're not going to see a transition. There is a line in there, I can feel it, but I mean, even looking at it off camera, I can't see it. So the J-tape will do that. So even in these, you can, well, in this front one, we don't care too much. But basically those ones, when you open the door, you don't want like a weird mess or, you know. But anyway, all his jams are in really good shape, no rust. The rockers are fine. We're not even going to touch those. They've been repaired before, and they got this plastic coating on them. It looks like clear vehicle wrap. So we're going to leave those alone. But on these trucks, you don't see the rocker when the door's shut anyway, right? So, and I mean, he oil sprays this, so you're not going to see it anyhow. But that's where we are. And I'm looking forward to this one being done, because it's a good looking truck, nice looking color. And I don't know if you remember in some of the older videos, I probably showed my 79 Firebird, and it's in a blue that's pretty nice, but I'd like to go with something a little more exotic. And I think I'm going to base it off this paint, and we might add some pearl into it. And anyway, that's it for now. But yeah, thanks.